When we engage with people in distress, our first task is to know our motive. Once we realize that we are moved by love and by compassion, then it's also important for us to make sure that we know our story, that we're anchored and grounded in our own history of God's faithfulness. If you have grief that you have not processed and worked through, if you have unresolved trauma in your own life, it's very likely that you'll be triggered by the trauma in others, that you'll be made uncomfortable by their own grief if you have grieving that you need to do yourself. All of us should have a firm grasp of how God has intervened in our story, especially in the tough times, to bring about His purpose for us. Romans 8:28 says that God is at work in everything for good if we love Him and are called according to His purpose. He goes on beyond that and says that those who He called, He predetermined to be conformed to the image of His Son. And so we know from our own experience that God uses adversity to forge the character of Christ in us. In Revelation, it says that they, believers, overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Your ability to stand firm in the face of trial, personally and with others, depends on your staying anchored in your testimony of God's faithfulness and His goodness. Struggles are meant to forge a deeper connection between us and God. In 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4, the Apostle Paul says it this way: "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." Isn't that great? That He allows us to experience wholeness and freedom and comfort so that we can share it with others. You know, some people think that God will never give you anything that's beyond your capacity to endure. But in fact, many times the struggles that we go through are bigger than we are. They're way beyond what we can endure. And a few verses later in that same chapter, 2 Corinthians 1, Paul says, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself." This is the Apostle Paul talking about being so overwhelmed by trouble that it was way beyond his ability to endure, that he despaired of life. He may have even been wishing for death. He goes on, "Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death, but this happened so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead." It is in those dark moments of our story that God seeks to connect with us in a profound way, to bring life from the dead, to bring hope in the midst of despair, and to bring peace out of chaos and turmoil. Knowing your story is so important, anchoring in the fact that those moments that seemed hardest in life are the very moments where we find God to be sufficient. We find Him to breathe fresh life. And as Job found in his suffering, we find the presence of God in a fresh way that allows us to engage Him with new life and new perspective. Think about your own experience as a child, as a young adult. What was the most challenging or stressful thing that you endured? What was your biggest struggle as a child or young adult? Think about it in terms of what it did in robbing you of peace and joy, how it affected you in a traumatic or painful way, what it robbed you of. But also think about how over time that struggle, that loss or tragedy was the thing that God also used to open your eyes to new life, to a new perspective. In my experience, people who struggle in childhood and young adulthood are often the most resilient, compassionate, and life-giving people that I know. If you haven't ever written out your story, I would encourage you to do first a timeline. Just write on a lined paper a year for every year of your life, putting down the significant events that were both positive and negative, looking at how God used the events of your life to forge character within you. Write your story, and particularly if you've had a major battle in your own life or a major struggle, write about how it robbed you and how it presented you with something fresh. In Psalm 23, David says that you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. In the face of every problem, God has a provision for you. And once you know your story and you can extract the good from the evil, it allows you to stay calm in the presence of someone who's in the thick of it, who's right in the middle of the middle where they see no hope and no way out. To stay calm, knowing that God will be there for them as He has been there for you. Know your story and stay anchored in God's goodness and faithfulness.